John and Emily had been married for over a decade, their lives intertwined with routine and shared dreams. John worked as a consultant, often traveling to different cities, while Emily managed a boutique and cared for their home. They had a seemingly happy marriage, with moments of laughter, shared meals, and plans for the future. Over time, Emily began to sense a subtle change in John. His phone was always face down, and he seemed distracted during conversations. He had started working longer hours, and often mentioned after-work gatherings with colleagues. Initially, Emily dismissed these signs, attributing them to his workload. However, doubt began to creep in. One evening, John left for a supposed business dinner, and Emily decided to call a mutual friend who worked at the same company. To her surprise, the friend mentioned there was no such event scheduled. Emily's heart sank, and she knew she needed to uncover the truth. The next day, she followed John after he claimed to have a meeting in another part of town. Keeping her distance, she saw him enter a cozy cafe and meet a woman she didn't recognize. They laughed and leaned close, their connection unmistakable. Emily felt a surge of betrayal and heartbreak. That night, Emily confronted John. He initially denied everything, but her persistence in the evidence left him with no choice. John admitted he had been seeing someone else for a few months. He claimed it had started innocently, but had grown into something more. He apologized, expressing regret, but the damage was done. Emily took time to process the betrayal, seeking support from close friends and therapy. After much reflection, she decided to leave the marriage, choosing her own peace and self-respect over trying to rebuild trust. Though the journey was painful, Emily found strength in starting anew, rediscovering herself and embracing the freedom to write her next chapter. In the months that followed, Emily faced a whirlwind of emotions: grief, anger, confusion, and eventually acceptance. At first, the silence of her empty home felt unbearable. She would catch herself reminiscing about the good times she and John had shared, questioning where things had gone wrong. But therapy helped her unpack her feelings, reminding her that his betrayal was not her failure. John reached out several times, apologizing profusely and begging for another chance. He sent flowers, heartfelt letters, and even proposed couples counseling. But Emily remained firm. She had come to realize that rebuilding trust with someone who had broken it so deeply would take more than apologies. She needed to prioritize her own healing over salvaging the relationship. Emily threw herself into her work at the boutique, expanding her business and finding joy in creative projects. She reconnected with old friends and started saying yes to invitations she had once declined. Slowly but surely, she began to feel like herself again, or perhaps a new, stronger version of herself. One evening, while attending an art exhibit, Emily met a kind and thoughtful man named Daniel. Unlike John, Daniel radiated openness and sincerity. They struck up a conversation about the paintings, which turned into coffee the following weekend and, eventually, more frequent dates. Emily was cautious, but Daniel's patience and genuine interest in her life helped her lower her guard. As time passed, Emily realized that while John's betrayal had been devastating, it had also set her on a path to rediscovery. She learned to trust her instincts, value her own worth, and embrace the possibilities of new beginnings. Her journey wasn't just about moving on from John. It was about reclaiming her life and learning to love herself again. When she thought back on the pain she had endured, Emily no longer felt anger or bitterness. Instead, she saw it as a chapter that had taught her resilience and clarity. She knew she deserved a love built on honesty, respect, and kindness, and she was finally ready to welcome it. As Emily's life slowly grew richer and fuller, she found herself appreciating the small moments that she had once taken for granted. Her mornings, once filled with a dull emptiness after John's departure, were now a time of peaceful solitude where she could savor a cup of coffee while planning her day. The bustling boutique she owned had become a place of fulfillment and pride, with a loyal clientele who had become friends. Her work no longer felt like a distraction, but a meaningful part of who she had become. Months passed, and Emily's relationship with Daniel deepened. He never pushed her to move faster than she was ready, always allowing her to open up on her own terms. The trust she had built with him was different from what she had experienced with John. With Daniel, there was no need for games or hiding behind facades. He was genuine, kind, and truly respected her as an individual. Still, even with this new love blooming, there were moments when the scars of her past with John would resurface, like when Daniel would share his thoughts about marriage, or when Emily would see couples holding hands in public. At times, she wondered if she could ever fully erase the hurt. But in those quiet moments, she reminded herself that healing wasn't linear. She would never forget the betrayal, but she didn't have to let it define her future. John, on the other hand, was struggling. After Emily left, he had tried to salvage his relationship with the other woman, but it wasn't the fairy tale he had imagined. His once perfect world had unraveled, and he was left alone with the consequences of his actions. Emily's departure had been a wake-up call, one that he never anticipated but couldn't ignore. He sought therapy, but it was unclear whether he would ever truly understand the depth of the pain he caused Emily. Some days, he thought about reaching out to her, apologizing again, hoping for reconciliation, but he knew deep down that it was too late. Meanwhile, Emily was no longer consumed by the past. One weekend, as she and Daniel sat on a park bench, talking about their hopes for the future, she felt a calm certainty. She knew that her journey, though hard, had led her to a place of peace. She had learned to rebuild her life from the ground up, to trust again, and to give herself the love and care she had once given to someone who didn't deserve it. In that moment, she realized something profound. Healing wasn't about finding someone else to fix the broken pieces. It was about learning to piece yourself together again, stronger than before. And now, with Daniel by her side, she had the space to continue growing, not just as a partner, but as the empowered woman she had become. The road ahead was still unknown, but for the first time in a long time, Emily felt ready to walk it with confidence, no longer defined by the pain of her past, but by the hope of what the future held.